Got here a hot rod DeVille 2x12, and the owner says the gain channel has popping / static noise when in use, and the volume drops. So let's see what's going on. First thing to note is the input jack, the main one, the higher gain input jack, has no nut and washer, so nothing is supporting that. Would not be surprised if the solder joints on the board are cracked, and if that issue is just more audible with higher gain. So we will test all such things and all such notions. So let's start with just a clean sound. That's the gain file. A little bit of crackle on the reverb pot. That'll clean it. Alright, that ought to be a pretty balanced sound. Let's go to the dreaded gain channel. It's going to clip the hell out of this lav mic. It's about as low as I can get it for this mic. Well, with the volume very low at least, I'm not hearing any issues. So let me lower the record level of this mic temporarily and turn up the level of the amp. Well, I'm not hearing any of the reported issues. Maybe it needs to get hotter. I do see one problem that might explain everything, especially at higher volumes. Let me show you that. The speaker terminal is just broken off. There's rivets here, and the little phenolic card that holds the speaker terminal is just floating in space. So that's possible that that speaker is cutting out when playing at a really loud volume, and it's more noticeable at the higher gain stuff. With an oldish hot rod series, and this is one of the first ones, I can tell by a number of factors, including all the really lovely factory rework as they change the schematic. We can't see where I'm pointing. Let me move that up. Right in here you can see this. Ah, that's interesting. One of the factory wires has come desoldered at this end. I wonder if that's what's going on with this thing. Alright, so yeah. Right here. This little red wire. Okay, yeah. I've got the amp powered off now. And this red wire is running from the cathode positive of this tube stage. going to this board hole return, which has nothing else connected to it. It's where a resistor used to be in the original version of this. And that is switching this little cap in and out of the parallel with the cathode. They changed their minds about how they wanted the voicing to change different high gain modes. And that was probably resting in place and vibrating loose and causing the problems the owner reported. So let's see if we can just touch that up and get it back to where it ought to be. See if I can do this with the camera in place so you guys can see. Though it's not a lot to see. Alright, I got old glava solder off. And get a little bit more of that off. I'm going to strip a little bit more of this wire and kind of give it a mechanical support before it's soldered in place. Right now it's just tack soldered. Now this amp was just powered on and I powered it off, and the issue I'm working with is the cathode, so there's not a lot of voltage on a cathode even when the amp is on in this case, but let's just make sure that there's nothing nasty waiting for me in the plates. Alright, so that's looking good. I got a little bit less than a volt. Yeah, I'm good. But for those who like to see me discharge caps and check all that fun stuff, and I'm not making fun, it's an important thing to do, and I do it all the time. It just slows a video down to do the same. If I have the same 10 minutes of every video starting, discharge the caps and why and how. It's great if you find that one video, but if it's your 10th video to watch, people tune out, you skip to another channel, and that stuff's pretty basic, and there are other channels that show that all the time and teach that. I'm trying to get to the more important things, like tack soldering is not always your friend in this case. So I'm going to give that a little bit of a loop. I'm not sure how much of this you can see. I set the camera up close and set the focus level kind of blind. But I want to give that an initial hook as best I can. Tight quarters in this reverb cable and big fat fingers don't help. I was watching T. Woodford remove a neck on a 55 Gibson this morning over coffee, and the stuff he does is so much more incredibly difficult than this, and I swear I have done things like this a million times with no issue when there's no camera rolling. I wonder if he edits out hours and hours of just God dang it and stuff like that. Looks so good when he's done. Where'd my snippers go? If you don't know Ted Woodford's channel, I highly recommend it. He does beautiful guitar repair, primarily on acoustics, and is a skill set I do not have. It's certainly a tool set I do not have. And I would say it's probably a temperament that I do not have. Just the process of sanding a guitar heel to do a neck angle reset, just, voop, and you clean it out, and voop on the other side, and you clean it out, and just do that. I'm sure that is a much longer process than we get to see in the final videos he uploads. But so anyway, that is now wrapped around that lead and soldered hot and quickly, so the resistor attached to the board would not have time to come loose. Now I'm going to make sure that that joint is not making any noise. I'm pretty sure that's the source of the owner's problem. And I was working here, which is left over from working on the Blues Junior yesterday at 725 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what, about 375 Celsius. It's warm. Hot and fast is the trick with PCBs, particularly one-sided PCBs. All right, so I'm gonna turn the volt master down as low as it goes on that channel because it's really freaking loud. Let's see if I get signal. Clip the mic already. Alright, the source of that cutting out is gone. I'm pretty sure this amp is much healthier than it was when we started this video. But I need to talk to the owner about that input jack and that speaker terminal. That speaker terminal, he can live with it. One of the things I try to do is sometimes I can pop it back on top of that rivet, but in this case I cannot. Sometimes if I can pop it back in place and it's just there, though it's not entirely secure, I can just put a little drop of epoxy and let that sit up overnight. I think he will eventually need at least one new speaker in this amp, but that can be kicked down the road a little bit. I think I'll probably just, it depends on what he wants. I'll be glad to change the speaker out. It's not worth repairing these OEM Eminence for Fender speakers. I could just put some electrical tape on the terminal so that they cannot contact the frame of the speaker. As far as the input jack goes, though, you can see here on this input jack that the plastic threads are just gone. They were mangled. So even if I had an extra nut and washer that fits this jack, it would not stay on here. And there's a lot of movement, and I'm sure some bad solder joints there. Now I can replace this jack with one just like it, with nuts, make it look factory. But between the cost of the jack and shipping, I don't think that's a good idea, because the chassis opening in this amp and the distance between the center line of the jack and where the board actually is means that this is a great candidate for the long bushing Switchcraft 12As. And I use those because the opening in the panel is larger than 3/8, but it is the exact right size to accept a Switchcraft shoulder isolation mount washer. So use the long bushings, which gives you the ability to use front and back isolation washers. It fits in the existing hole perfectly, no drilling, and it's a much higher quality jack. Now, I've mentioned it in other videos, but this may be the first time you learned this. On the Hot Rods and Blues series amps, the DeVilles and Deluxes and such, the earlier amps, all 5 input jacks are the same size, this one. On the later amps, these 2 are larger, as is the foot switch jack, and only the send and return are the same size. Let me move this down to let you see that. Alright, here you can see that all 3 are the same size. On the later amps, these 2 are just like this, but this jack and the 2 input jacks is physically larger, and it's a much higher quality jack. The issue being on those later ones, if you want to replace the input jacks with switchgraphs, it's tricky because remember I mentioned the distance from the center hole of the jack to the board being right on these for switchgraphs. The gap is not enough on the newer ones, so the switchgraph physically doesn't fit there. There are some other jacks you can use, or you can cut away the PCB and splice some missing traces if you need to. If you absolutely have to make it work. But in general, on the newer ones, if there's a jack problem, I get a new version of the original factory jack because it does fit and it works pretty well, actually. It's not the Achilles heel that these earlier ones are. Anyway, let me call the owner, let him know what I found and what I recommend. I do recommend me pulling the board and changing out those input jacks, but it's not my money to spend, it's his. So let me get his consent. I spoke to the owner, and we're going to change these jacks out for some Switchcraft 12As, which is good. And I'm going to check a few other things while I have the board flipped over. So first thing is just to, you got to kind of gently manhandle these things because they got all this wire that gets trapped between the two boards from the output transformer connections and such, and you just kind of figure out how much you can force things just to clear that gap. We're so close. There we go. All right. I'm going to very carefully let this hang this way. And let's see here. This input jack has already been reflowed once. Not very well, but it's been reflowed, as has the effects loop stuff. I'm not seeing any other issues on the board except, no, not even seeing any heat issue from the diodes. This model is not quite as prone to the burning in this area as the Hot Rod Deluxe is, because they're dropping less voltage to begin with. But everything looks pretty good. So let's get these two jacks out and ready for the new jacks to go in. While I have the board flipped down like this, I'm also going to add a little extra solder to those preamp tube sockets. I've already done the output tube sockets, but these are easier to reach with the board flipped down, just because they're a little bit solder starved. Now this is a lot easier to do on these earlier ones where they used leaded solder, because I can just add more solder to the existing solder. I don't have to get all the lead-free stuff out to be able to add adequate amounts. But they don't use much, and there's a lot of stress on these joints over time when you change tubes. Heat builds up. Just getting a known stronger solder joint is a nice thing while I'm in the neighborhood, so to speak. All right, time to get the old input jacks changed out, or at least removed while I wait for the Switchcrafts to arrive. All right, I've shown how to do this in many other videos, so I didn't show it again, but the jacks are removed, the pads are cleaned, no flux, no dirt, no old solder, ready to accept the new Switchcraft jacks when they arrive the next day or two. For those who do want to see it, I have playlists on my channel, so if you go to my Blues and Hot Rods playlist, you're going to see a ton of Blues DeVilles and Blues Deluxes and Hot Rod DeVilles and Hot Rod Deluxes and some Blues Juniors and stuff, and you'll see me change these out and how I do all this. One other thing to do for now, before I just put this to the side waiting for the new input jacks to arrive, I got all kinds of yuck off this chrome, and then I gave a little bit of WD-40 to get the stuff that just wasn't dust, and the amp looks pretty. That's an important thing when you get the amp back. I'm not going to clean all the Tolex. That's not what I'm hired to do on these things, but this kind of stuff matters. And if you own one of these, you know, maybe once a month, get in there with a little duster. All kinds of static dusters on the market these days, and just keep it clean. It'll take no time at all, but this stuff builds up and gets yucky. Then if you do a liquid spill on this stuff, it'll just corrode. This one's still looking good, so time to order the switches, and in a couple days we'll put this back together.